Hey, beer appreciators, Sawadi Krab. Welcome to Beer Times Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. For today's session, we will have some good burps about maximizing your drinking perception via tasting topic. It is all about drinking, yes. The fact that the action of drinking that you probably literally be familiar with it, you do it like every day. It's part of your daily life. But yes, there's always a but here for our platform. So this time we will try to tackle this topic from an interesting perspective. Like when isn't drinking just drinking, and isn't tasting the same thing as drinking, right? So well, if you really think about it, have you ever take a moment and think about the way you drink, and like how does your body actually perceive those awesome drinks? And if there are ways to enhance your experience with that same drink in your hand, will you be interested to hear about it and give it a try? Well, this sort of questions will be answered by our guest speaker, whom tasting is one of his area of expertise. And here is a bit of his background. Okay, his profession is a graphic designer, which integrates art and science together. Working with people, trying to understand how they think, how they feel, and then come up with an appropriate, impression works is nothing like new or exciting in his daily job. And along the road, strange enough, around mid 90s, 1985, somewhere around that, somehow he was bitten by a home brewing box. And that fascinating world, lured him down the road through the rabbit hole. And ever since then, from the late 90s onward, not only that, he has never left the brewing scene, but he also put his skills to help people to have a better understanding and appreciation about beer and brewing as well. From sharing knowledge via publications like All About Beer magazine and Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, to teaching younglings in the industries, at SIBO Institute of Technology, and to writing books, like Radical Brewing and the famous one, Tasting Beer. So please welcome our guest speaker, Randy Mosher.
Thank you, Napat. Great to be here.
Hey, hello, Randy. Welcome to the platform. And
Yeah.
it's really great to see you.
It is.
Finally.
Yeah.
So how's it going over there in Chicago? The weather is nice. Everything's good.
Well, it's just starting to be spring. The flowers are
Mhm.
just starting to come up.
Oh,
We
okay.
had we had about this much snow the night before last, but it mostly melted off yesterday. So we're kind of in that, period where it goes up and down and up and down. But that's part of the changing cycles of the year here. So
Right. And you've been busy doing the new project or something?
we're in editorial. We've been in the editorial process for, believe it or not, 18 months now.
Oh,
And
yeah. And
it seems like it's never going to end. It's just unbelievable. So, but
it will end.
it
will
will
end.
end. I know it has to end because,
Yeah, definitely.
let me turn my printer off. It's making noise.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Okay, that's better. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I've got final text, I've got final illustrations. We're arguing over the length of the book right now,
Mhm.
and trying to figure out how to get it to fit into certain amount of pages and things. So it's kind of a boring part of the process, but
It
I'm
has to be
hoping
done.
we get it.
Yeah.
Hope we get it moving and continue, because I've got 6 years of work in this thing. So
Right. Right. It's a long road, right? Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
I was an idiot to think that I could cover this topic,
Mhm.
because it's absolutely vast. It's not
Yeah.
just one sensory system. It's like three major ones, and some, like, each one of those has dozens or hundreds of parts, and then of course it involves your whole brain too. So I had to
Yeah.
learn an awful lot about neuroscience and the way our the way our brains are organized and how we process and think and feel about the things we taste. So it's been very fascinating, and it's completely changed my perspective on all of that from both
Right.
the point of view and with a couple of breweries, also
Mhm.
from the creating flavor point of view, because there's sort of two sides of the same coin. To be a taster, you need to understand how yourself works, but
Yeah.
to be a producer, you need to understand how your audience's minds work and what they're interested in, how they perceive things, and how to talk about things to frame things correctly so that they have
Mhm.
some direction as for what they're supposed to expect. So it's been really fascinating, and I think that people in all the culinary arts are going to really appreciate it when I finally get it on the shelves.
Yeah, and this we are talking about your new work. It will be in a book format, right?
Yes, it's a book. It's called
Okay.
Your Tasting Brain: How It
Yeah.
Works and How to Use It. So it's very,
Well.
we wanted to make sure that people understood that it's not just about what happens in your nose and mouth, but it
Right.
happens all over your brain. There's
Right.
almost no part of your brain that's not involved somehow.
Yeah. So like when you mentioned the word, you have to learn the neuroscience, and I was like, neuroscience and beer, man. It's like very abstract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I started this whole project. I was giving talks called "Beer Tasting as a Path to Self-Awareness,"
Hmm.
because it's just kind of a stupid title, and it seems like, well, tasting beer, drinking beer, like, how does that lead to
Yeah.
self-awareness? But you can make a
Yeah.
pretty good case for it. And then I realized that this is not a beer book at all. This is really like
Hmm.
all food, all drink, everything that
Hmm.
we consume in that way. So
Yeah. It can be applied to all uh, things, food and beverage across the board.
wine even.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Wine is not complete nonsense. There's actually some meaningful things you could say about wine. So
Hmm. 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 Yeah, true. Yes, I'm just gonna have to look forward for the release date. Yeah, soon I will have
yeah,
my hands
me
on
too.
your book for sure. Okay, okay. So Randy, I think before we head to today's topic, the main dish, I'd like to address you one question first,
Mhm.
just to warm things up.
Sure.
Like how did you become interested in beer tasting, and what drove you to wanted to understand the mechanism behind it?
Well, one thing leads to another in life, right? So
Hmm.
I went to school in a town not too far from a few hours drive from here called Cincinnati. And at that point in 1970, there were 4 old independent breweries still making beer. And so my college pals used to go down to the breweries and pick up kegs for parties and things like that. So I guess I got it in my head early on that there could be not just Budweiser and Miller and all the mass market beers, but like independent ones.
Right.
And then as I, started working, I had enough money to go and buy some import beers and things like this. It was long before craft brewing. And
Hmm.
then stumbled across a book by Michael Jackson called The
Hmm.
World Guide to Beer, and it really was like sticking your finger in an electric socket. The book was it was just opened a door to a world I had no idea even existed. And
Hmm.
me and a friend started homebrewing right around that same time, and we would use
Right.
that book as a recipe book. We talked about wheat beer. Well, that sounds really interesting. It's got coriander and
Hmm.
orange peel in it and raw wheat, and it's like, okay, we can cobble together a recipe for this
Yeah.
beer out of that. And
Hmm.
once I started really getting, brewing is a an art that is driven by science very strongly.
Yeah.
And if you don't
Yeah.
get the science right, your beer will be terrible, unless you just get very lucky, right? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
started going to the public library and taking out these big fat brewing technology books from the
Yeah.
1950s, and just absorbing all of that information about German
Techniques. Yeah. Hmm.
mashing techniques and like all the details of hop utilization. And I started making notes, and because I'm a graphic designer, I made a worksheet, and now you
Hmm.
have places to put in how much bitterness you're getting from hops. and how much gravity you're getting from malts. And that made me create some charts on malts and hops. And then that became my first book, which was called Brewer's Companion.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate at the time to meet a gentleman named Charles Finkel out in Seattle, who was the first person who really started importing very high quality craft beers like Lindemans and Eyinger. And he used that Michael Jackson book as a shopping guide. So he just called the monks at Orval and said, "Hello, monks at Orval. I'm Charles Finkel in Seattle. I would like to represent your brand in the United States." And they would say, well, I don't see why not. Nobody'd ever asked. And so he was the first person in the US to sell a $10 6-pack. And at a time when Budweiser was $2. Right. So he was a genius marketer, and he really marketed my book well. He put it in homebrewing kits that they sold at a big national retailer. And so that just got me. And at about the same time, I was working in an advertising agency, and I learned to write there. I was an art director. I could write a little, but my boss there was just like pounding on my head for 6 months until I got better. And it was a great way to learn, actually. And so that just sort of got me off on that track. And then I stayed in beer because a lot of my friends who I'd met through homebrew judging and things like that were starting small breweries, and they knew I could do graphic design. So that really became the focus of my design career, and it kept me close to the industry and got me eventually involved with the Siebel Institute here in Chicago, the brewing school. And, with just one little thing led to another. And it was actually a Siebel class that led to tasting beer, because I had been teaching the material for about 2 years. And I just occurred to me that this PowerPoint slide deck that I have here, if I just basically strip it out and put it into a Word doc, it's a pretty good outline for a book. So I did that. And that was, that was that project. So again, in life, you just stepping stone from one thing to another. And here I am. I just had a lot of questions. I didn't have much more to say about beer, but so I didn't want to repeat myself with another book on beer. So I started thinking, there's really never been a book on tasting that's not just a super technical academic type book that has a lot of gaps in them. Those books are generally kind of flawed. But I wanted something that would be pretty reasonably technical and really explain everything, but also be written for lay people and for people who are cooks and brewers and chefs and winemakers and everything else who really had questions about the process. So that got me started on that project. So
that's cool. It's like it's a wild snowballing effect that brought you here, and it's great, man. It's great. It's really great.
That's the way life works,
Yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing the stories, and it's very cool.
Sure.
Okay, now we have to serve the main dish. Okay, Randy, I believe that the best way to tackle this topic is to first understand how our body works, with the beverage, how it's react, how it's perceived. So can you please help describe our sensory system that is involved in the perceiving of beer's savoriness?
Okay, well, this will take about 6 hours.
All right.
Well, basically, you have visible systems and you have hidden systems. But you have the obvious systems are three what they call chemical senses that respond to things that we smell or that we put into our mouths. That is taste, which is the sweet, sour, salty, bitter, the very basic things about taste, and that mainly occurs in the tongue, although sometimes a little bit on the rest of your mouth and so on. And then we have mouthfeel, which is actually about, I don't know, a dozen different senses, or maybe not quite that many, but many different senses: sensing heat, sensing cold, sensing various kinds of touch, sensing like irritation via certain chemicals like high amounts of alcohol or solvents or things like that. And that takes place, even though it's called mouthfeel, It's equally important in the nose as well, because we have those sensors in our nose. And
Right.
so when we smell, say, ammonia, it's not a smell, it's an irritation of those receptors in the mouthfeel system. It's called trigeminal system is the more technical term, because that describes the name of the nerve that feeds it all into your spine. It's different pathways than what your nose goes through and what your tongue goes through. So it's its own separate, and it's really more like a warning system than anything else. It rings alarm bells. It can sense, it can make you feel pain. It really is like, has a very high priority in terms of its signals and the way the brain like prioritizes them, because it's really a danger prevention type of system. Heat, too hot, too cold. Your body, you need to react to that. You need to be highly motivated in ways that taste and smell don't always do it for human beings. And then finally, we have smell, which we have almost 400 different receptors for aroma, for odors. And most of them can sense more than one kind of chemical. Most chemicals stimulate more than one receptor. And so when we smell something, it creates this pattern of responses, of positive responses, negative responses. And those things are basically shown to the brain. They're presented to the brain, and the brain uses them with the same type of circuitry that we use to recognize faces. Right. It's like, which is why, like, sometimes when you see somebody walking down the street towards you, as you're walking towards them, there's an instant where you finally make that recognition, like, oh, that's my friend Joe. And that's why smell sometimes can feel that way. It's like, there's something there, but then your brain finally picks that pattern up and like identifies it. But the chemical information, this pattern of responses to all these different chemicals, it never gets inside the brain. The brain looks at it, says, okay, that's this thing that I will identify as a banana. And so there's like an index card of a banana in your brain that's stored in your brain. And the index card includes like how it feels. Do I like it? Do I not like it? What's the context? What's my memory association with it? Like if it's a wine you're smelling and you're a sommelier, your index card has all this information about, well, it's a Burgundy from the northern part of the Burgundy region, probably this side of this river and in a warm year, right? So these can be extraordinarily complex, and developing these index cards, the scientists call this information semantic information, because it's not purely sensory. It really is like intellectual information. It's categorization, it's names, it's numbers, it's all those kinds of things. And this is really what differentiates really experienced tasters from people who are just starting out. Because when you're just starting out, your index card's like, okay, I have one for beer. And that's all. That's it. It just says beer. I like it. I drink it. I don't have a lot of information. But as you start to learn the styles, it's like, oh, well, this is it's a dark beer. Well, is it a Munich Dunkel? Is it a Scotch ale? All right. So you start to develop that, and then you understand the context, a little of the history. As a brewer, you start to learn what malts are involved and what particular odors you're going to get from certain types of malts. And so, your sophistication really, really grows over time as you have experience and actively train for this kind of thing. So those are the three things, but they don't operate, they do operate independently to some degree. But as soon as they come into the brain, they start melding together, right? So they blend together in ways that makes it very hard for us to pull them apart. Because the brain wants to simplify things, right? We have despite our amazing capacity and an enormous number of nerve cells, it's still a limited resource, right? So not bothering to save these very specific receptor patterns for individual odor chemicals is really efficient for the brain. So by putting smell and taste and mouthfeel together, we get something that we call flavor.
Mm,
right? So
right,
flavor is
right,
sort of a mixture of all of those things that together, it together gives you the overall character of whatever it is you're tasting.
right, right. So, in summary, right, the three main systems of our body that's involved in this perceived things is the sense of taste, sense of
Mm-hmm.
smells, and sense of sight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, excuse me. I think now probably it's time to further dive into the realm of each sense and see what do they do, and how can we harness the power of each sense to maximize our drinking perception.
Sure.
So Randy, can you please help walk us through details of each sensory system, how it works? So let's start from the taste first, and then smell, and then sight. All right.
Well, mouthfeel. See, so let me
Mhm.
just start with sight for a
Okay,
minute.
sure.
So I have a headline in the book that says, first, poke your eyes out, right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
beer is really beautiful. Wine is also, but the amount of actual information contained in a beer's color is almost zero. You could tell if
Yeah.
it's clear or not. You could tell if the
Mhm,
head is good, and that's a really key thing about beer quality, is having a really
mhm.
good quality head, because
Right.
those are challenging to make. And if a beer has a good head, that's a really good brewer, for the
Mhm,
most part. Um, but there's to make a beer of any particular color, there's a lot of ways to get to it. So color really doesn't describe the flavor that you're going to get because it's dark. Because
mhm.
you could take a Pilsner beer and put a tiny amount of really, really, really dark malt in it, and you can get it really to be quite an amber color. But if you're
Right.
blindfolded and you taste it, it won't taste any different than a Pilsner, because
Mhm,
those dark malts have a lot of color, but they don't really have that much flavor. Of course, when you use a lot of them in a stout, you get the roastiness, but a tenth of a percent or
mhm,
some tiny amount will really not add much flavor. And they do that in all mass market beers, have a little bit of that black malt coloring
mhm.
added to them, because otherwise they would be so pale as to be kind of frightening. It
Right.
really makes it look like beer if you have just a bit of that color. So
Mhm.
that's like, let's start with, like, just wanted to get that out of the way. But let's start with taste. Okay, you can put
Yeah,
up the
sure.
chart on taste. Taste has really very few different characteristics, right? There's sweet,
Mhm.
sour, salty, and bitter. Those are the four classic tastes.
Right.
Umami is a taste that's been known about for quite a while, but it's not known. People are not aware of it everywhere. I
Mhm.
read a study that said something like only 3% of people in Germany even know what umami is. But if you look at German cuisine, it's full of
Mhm.
cheese and aged meat and
Right.
and gravy and
Mhm.
stews, and it's full of umami. But the Germans, it's like it's not on their radar, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
umami is, like, some people even make the case that umami is not exactly like a classic taste, like bitter, sweet, salt, sour,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
salty, because it first of all, it is so vague. You really have to be looking for it to find it. It doesn't come up and punch you in the face like salty
Right.
or acidic or bitter
Mhm.
will, or sweet even. But the other thing is that umami by itself, by pure glutamate, which is what our bodies respond to, it almost has no real sense of flavor, and it requires some vegetable flavoring or some meaty flavoring or some other actual aromatics to turn it into something that we can actually recognize. So it's
Mhm.
in its basic form, it's kind of what they call a multimodal sense, right? That it depends on more than one sense coming together to create its effect. And then they
Right.
think maybe there are some metallic tastes, carbonation, they think is a taste, fat taste. It
Mhm.
looks like all the parts and pieces are there for it in terms of a receptor and various processes, but it's still, they call it provisional, meaning it's sort of like, we think fat's a taste, but
Mhm.
we're not 100% sure. So let's just call it like undecided.
Okay.
Okay, so each of these are really separate, right? Salty is
Yeah.
salty, bitter is bitter, sweet is sweet. They don't interact, much. They don't mix together to combine into new things as aromas do. And we'll talk about that later. But they can mask or enhance one another, right? So they can bitterness, if you're cooking with beer, for example, one common problem is if you dump a bottle of beer into a stew, at the end, it's going to have a little bitterness. But if you put a little, you can mask the bitterness with a little acidity, or with a little sweetness, or with a little saltiness, or a combination of all three in a really subtle way that's just enough to kind of mask that bitterness off. So there is some interaction, but there's no joining together. So they're very distinct. They're very easy to recognize. Every child knows sweet. We're hardwired to love sweet. That's why babies, you put sugar water on their tongue and they are like, la, 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 happy, happy, happy.
Super happy, yeah.
And you put bitterness. There's actually a great photo I've got in the book of a very high resolution sonogram of a baby in a womb, a fetus in a womb. And the mother in one photo has just eaten carrots. And carrots are kind of sweet. So the baby is like, smiling. And they show all the muscle movements that reflect a true smile. These are scientists, right? And then there's another one. It's just the classic rejection response because the mother has just eaten kale, and the baby is like rejecting. It's just like that classic angry, sad look, And it's like that's coming through the bloodstream. Those are bitter chemicals, and infants and children are extraordinarily sensitive to bitter. And it wasn't really understood why, because mainly most bitter chemicals are not, only about half of bitter compounds are toxic. Only about half of toxic compounds are bitter. None of the bitter compounds are really deadly poisons. So like if it's supposed to be a detector system for toxins, it's kind of a crappy one. It's not really very good. But what it turns out is really sensitive to are the chemicals found in broccoli and that whole family of plants that in young children under the age of maybe 5 or 7, it can cause thyroid problems and goiter.
Oh, okay.
And so women who are pregnant are very, very sensitive because they're trying to protect the fetus. Women who have morning sickness, which is a direct result of this whole like expelling toxic things, tend to have higher birth weight and healthier babies.
Okay.
Which is like crazy, but that's like, so that's what bitter does. And and then salt, like some of these things, we have multiple different detection systems for salt. We have 3 different systems to detect salt, and one of which is the mouthfeel system. So when salt hits a certain level, it's like, get it out. And you're just like, if somebody ever plays a trick and dumps salt into your coffee or puts salt in the sugar shaker, in your coffee, your first thing is like, And it's like, you don't think about that. That's an autonomic response that goes through, like your brain up here is not involved in that decision at all. And it's similar with high amounts of acidity. So the systems have evolved for, ever. I mean, there's no creature that has ever lived on this planet, no species that has not had a chemical sense. Because even the earliest simple life forms, drifting around 3-4 billion years ago, they had to be able to move towards things that were good for them and move away from danger. And so, that goes back, and that's a lot. I think a lot of these senses make more sense when you understand their basic, like protective and nurturing aspects, which is really what they were created for, to keep us out of trouble and to keep us nourished and healthy and surviving. Right. So, that's the taste system.
Right. And besides from, this umami, salty, bitter, sour, sweet, you also mentioned mouthfeel, right? And the mouthfeel in the world of beer is also associated with the carbonation level too, right? The fizziness,
Yeah, that's one aspect. Although we do have a taste for carbonation, there's a mechanism on our tongue that's kind of complicated to explain, but we can definitely taste carbonation. And it also brings a little bit of acidity. When carbon dioxide dissolves, it creates
carbonic acid.
It's not very strong acid, but you can definitely taste it. And then but and also of course the prickle on your tongue, and that's a mouthfeel sensation.
Mm-hmm.
So the mouthfeel is your second of the chemical senses, and it's very important for every food, every beverage. In food, it's an indication of caloric content in a way, especially when you get to, like, it's a really good measurer of fat content. You know, they can tell fat content in cream in, like, separated by just a percentage of fat on your, just by the way it feels on your mouth.
Right.
And you have multiple different sensing systems built into your skin, and including in your tongue, and the things that allow you to touch your finger and feel a texture of leather or wood or something like that. That relies on certain type of touch cells that we also have highly concentrated in our tongue. And the tip of your tongue has a higher concentration of those touch cells than the tip of your finger, than the tip of your index finger. It's the most sensitive part of your body, which is why, you know, when you have some small defect in a tooth, it feels like it's this big.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So it's like has this, you've seen maybe the body maps that show the importance of, like, the hands and feet versus the sides of your legs for touch sensitivity. And the hands are always like gigantic. Your tongue should be gigantic too, because it's very sensitive. So in beer, the carbonation, of course, you can see it. You can see the foam. You can, but beer itself has a texture that's made. It's similar to gelatin. So it's this network of proteins that are sort of connected loosely to each other in a way that allows them to trap water and to force to create higher viscosity. And that's why when you're brewing, managing the protein structure of your beer is really critical. It's technical, but it's also really critical, and it can make give that beer a nice body. And then also in beers like wheat beers and rye beers, and beers that use unmalted grains like wheat and oats, that can create this creaminess that's a really lush and luxurious feeling, because we associate it with fattiness, which is like positive, and we like that because it indicates caloric content. It doesn't indicate calories in beer particularly, but it feels nice, and it feels rich, and that's one thing that the newer sort of hazy IPA styles always aim at, is having a lot of unmalted grains to add this sort of rich, plush character to counterbalance the extreme fruity hop aroma in beer. And one thing to know about the mouthfeel system is that most odor chemicals, most chemicals that have a smell, if you raise their concentration high enough, they will start triggering an alarm in your trigeminal system. And one common chemical they use in tasting sessions, training sessions, is called ethyl acetate. It's a very common ester, which is a fruity chemical. It's one of the main products of fermentation. It's in all fermented beverages, distilled beverages. Everything has it. It has a very vague, kind of like a rum. They describe it as a bit of a rummy kind of flavor. It's not like banana where you just pick it out, but at a certain concentration, it just makes that beer, adds to the fruitiness of beer. But when you raise that up to a certain level, it's too strong for your nose to pick up. But now your eyes water, and you get this stinging sensation in your nose, like you've been working with model airplane glue or nail polish or something like that, where that kind of makes your eyes tear up, and you get this sensation in your nose, but it's actually not a smell. So you've passed it off from being an odor, and you raise that concentration by 100 times, and now it's up at a level that it's a trigeminal sensation, which I think is pretty interesting. I didn't know. That's something I found out by doing that. So it's so much of what constitutes being a taster is really just dependent on paying attention. Because in tasting, like, I like to drink, I like to have a beer and just relax and just enjoy the beer and not really think about it. It's easy to turn off the taster mindset, but
from time to time.
But yeah, well, you need to, right? Because you can't
Yeah.
stay away all the time. You know, ultimately, these things are about pleasure. And if you're
Yeah.
only tasting it critically, I mean, maybe that's fun for you. And I sometimes can really enjoy that. But at other times, it's like, let me just have a beer and I'll just enjoy it and focus on how pleasant it is, right? But it's really
Yeah.
where you know, your attention is like a spotlight, and you only have one. You don't have two, you
Yeah.
don't have five. You have one attentional spotlight, and you can point
Right.
it wherever you want to point it. And a lot of
Yeah.
really the practical aspect of being a taster is like, where am I pointing it? What's my expectation? How do I go through this process? And like, because the goal is extracting information. It's not receiving pleasure, it's extracting information. So that's a different mental task. So you have to be a little analytical. You have to try and pull apart things that the brain wants to put together. You know, if you smell a beverage and you say, "Oh, it smells sweet," like a wine, for example. My wife does this all the time, and it's easy to do. It's easy to, you smell a wine that smells. If your brain goes to sweet, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Because it cannot smell sweet. But sweet and fruit are associated together in your brain. Your brain knows, you know, your brain has a model of how the universe works, and your world especially. And in that world, sweetness and fruitiness, they go together because that's what fruit is, right? So if you smell sweet, you have to catch yourself and say, it can't be that. It can't be sweet, but what is it? So with wine, it's usually fruit. So it's again just like knowing little things like that, and knowing how to kind of what these, like, your brain's going to go where it's going to go, and you can't tell it not to, but you can learn, like there's a buttery smelling chemical called diacetyl. It's very common flaw in beer. And in a pale beer, it smells just like popcorn in the movies. You know, just that really kind of artificial, super buttery sort of thing. It's not very pleasant in beer, although it's tolerated in wine. But in a dark beer, it doesn't smell like butter. It makes the beer smell like pastry or cake, like some kind of baked good, because that's the context, right? If you have toastiness and butteriness, what do you learn in life about those two things together? Well, it's pastry, right? So if I find my brain goes to pastry, it's like, oh wait, no, let me go back, get that spotlight a little more focused. Oh yeah, that's butter. You know, pay attention to the way it goes down your throat, and it's the way it finishes. It's like, yeah, that's some butter on there, but it smells different. So you have to learn that too.
Gotcha. I mean, completely agree. Sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so that's, you know, that's the mouthfeel system, and again, we have to just pay attention to it. And mouthfeel can be quite negative also. And one of the really important areas of flaws to look out for in a wine or a beer is a harsh finish.
Okay.
Right? Because we've all had beers that are, you know, partially possibly because they're stale, because that tends to exhibit some unpleasant dryness on the palate. But also can be hops, it can be water chemistry, it can be a lot of different things that causes this kind of rough, astringent, unpleasant finish. And so you have to really go all the way to the end of the taste. When everything's out of your mouth, it's swallowed, you can't really smell anything, like what's still on your tongue.
All right.
You know, can you taste that? And with a wine, you know, the money is in wines that have a lot of tannin, but the tannins are what they call supple, or which is like a weird wine term, but which just means kind of smooth rather than harsh and edgy. And so that's really important. So that kind of wraps up mouthfeel, I think.
Gotcha. And you know, I mean, when we talk about the mouthfeel, you've touched quite sometimes about the sense of smell. So I think it's like you know, the next section that we're going to talk about. Please drive us through it.
Yeah. So we have multiple senses of smell in a way. We have two main ways of sensing smell. One is, and then you've got the charts there, I think. Yeah. So one is just what you always have known it to be. You put a glass to your nose and you take a little sniff, and you some impression pops into your head for no apparent reason, right? Just like these little images. because
Yeah.
because one thing about the sense of smell that is really important to understand is that it's the one sense that bypasses a part of the brain that's called the thalamus. And the
Hmm.
thalamus is the really kind of the organizing principle of all senses. It has dimensions. It has an up and a down and a left and a right and a back and a front. It's organized in like a 3D manner. So
Right.
everything goes through there. Um, and it gives us information about our environment and our world, and puts us, like when we see things, it puts us in the scene because we know up from down and back, left from right. And the thalamus is and the thalamus is also a thing that really, if you're looking for one part of the brain that's viewed as maybe where consciousness actually lives, it may well be the thalamus.
Hmm.
So, but smell has the thalamus has no use for smell, because smell, if you think about the shape of a curl of smoke coming off a cigarette, right?
Right.
It comes up and it weaves around and it blows in the breeze, and it's really strong in some places and really weak in other places, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
That's how smell is, right? Just imagine that those are smell chemical molecules coming out of a wine glass. It looks just like that curl of smoke. So there's no information about space or time that's useful to the thalamus. So it skips it. And it's possible
Hmm.
that part of the smell may be the oldest sense that we have. So it may have even, and I'm theorizing here, and I don't know that this is actual science, but it may be that it just happened before the thalamus ever happened, and there was no reason to ever get it connected up.
Right.
And
Right.
so this is why your smell goes directly into those parts of your brain that are closest to the middle of your skull. There, if you look at a slice of the brain, there's the thinking brain, this big
Yeah.
thick cap of gray matter of your
Right.
neocortex. It goes all across from the front to the back. That's like 90%, 80% of your brain. Inside are all these little different parts and pieces that have originated at different times and for different purposes. You know, you have the amygdala, which is like the house of pleasure and pain. And one end of it is pain and unpleasantness, and one end of it is pleasant. And it really, most of its work is around unpleasantness. And so
Right.
that's our little little kind of detector of like and dislike, which is really, really important. And that's a useful useful clue when you're trying to determine if something is. The first cut you can make is do I like it? Do I not like it? You
Right.
know, and it's not really enough to get you where you want to go, but you can eliminate a lot of things.
Hmm.
And then your hippocampus is it's like the directory on your hard drive. It
Right.
doesn't store everything, but it knows where all the parts and pieces are. So it'll recognize a clue from the pattern of receptor responses, and then it will call up that memory and load that memory into in that working memory, and
Hmm.
the pattern of brain activation of a memory looks very much like the pattern of brain activation in the original stimuli.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah, right. And even the fact they used to think that people were unable to visualize aromas,
Hmm. Yeah,
but
okay.
of course we can visualize aromas.
Hmm.
We can even have we can have aroma hallucinations in schizophrenia, right? Which are
Okay.
terrifying and highly realistic. So the brain can do this, and you can learn
Okay.
as a taster, and really as a flavor producer. That's one of the things you work on, is building up your ability to visualize smells and
Hmm.
flavors as a whole. So it's a lot
Right.
easier to go through a dozen beer recipes in your head by like imagining what flavors I would like to see and kind of thinking about it and visualizing it without putting anything on paper or even any kind of blending or brewing. You can work through those things in your head until you have an idea you like, and then you can start putting it down and make a recipe and do some things to move towards actually producing it. So that's a lot of digression, but it's, I think, important stuff. But anyway,
It's relevant. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
relevant. So
Yeah.
this explains why these memories are weird,
Hmm.
but they're also really useful. So, and one of the things, again, that is a tip, is learn to not censor yourself about whatever your response to a smell might be.
Right.
My wife and I were at a champagne tasting a couple of years. She loves champagne, and we go out to one during the holidays, and she picked up a glass of champagne and she goes, horseradish.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, let's parse that out, right? It's like a wasabi thing, right? And so, and it turned out that there was a little bit of mustiness, maybe from a bad piece of cork in the champagne cork, that just made it just a little bit earthy smelling. And then there was some characteristic of the grape that was kind of spicy in the aroma. So you put spicy and earthy together, that's pretty much what horseradish was. And so for her brain, those two things, but that's the kind of thing a normal person would think that's just stupid. I'm not going to say that, but I've got her trained to not censor herself. So whatever pops in your head, just blurt it out, because it's always right. That's one thing you got to learn, that your systems are way more capable than you know. They're really, really good. And people are like, well, we can't smell as good as dogs. It's like, you don't want the dog's life, right? You don't want to live in a world that dogs or mice, or they have, most of what they have that we don't have are about behavior. They're about sniffing butts and dominance and mating and predator fear and all that kind of stuff. And we have, like, we use this part of our brains to do things that most other mammals do with the really low parts of the brain. We have free will over all that stuff. And we're super flexible, and where they are, we like, animals have a mandatory salt level adjustment system built into their sense of taste, right? Human beings have the ability to think, I'm going to be running after some gazelles all day today. I better get some salt before I go out and sweat it all out. Right. So this is the kind of flexibility that we have that the lower animals, they're not lower, but they're different. These smaller animals, they just don't have that flexibility. So you can't ever think that we're not really capable, because we're superbly capable. So anyway, back to the first smell, the orthonasal, it's called. You put something to your nose, you sniff it. Sniffing is a neural event.
Right.
Sniffing actually triggers synchronization of brain regions that are going to be involved in perceiving smell and other things. Right. So it's like, it's not just air movement. It actually triggers synchronization. And your brain, and you don't want to try and control the sniff. You want to just let your brain run the sniff. Just do what feels naturally. Pick up a glass, go like that, Right. And because half a second or less can really give you all the information you need to make an identification. And then you can go back and you can smell it again and focus on something different. You can start pulling more information out, but you don't want to go, because what'll happen is, even in that short period of time, your receptors are going to tire out and stop responding. And then you can't smell it at all. Then there's certain chemicals you can't smell at all. It's called habituation. And it happens on really short timetables. It happens over longer timetables of as much as a few weeks, which is why people who make air fresheners struggle with the flavors wearing out. But the flavors don't wear out. The flavors are just fine, but our brains stop responding. They just become part of the background. Right. And that's just to prevent, that's again, that brain seeking efficiency and trying to do the most with the least amount of infrastructure. So if you don't have this ability to tune things out that are not changing, then you're just being constantly bombarded with useless information. And so the brain has this layer, this like sort of like, almost, you think of it like a firewall that's like, okay, this was important when we first walked into this room, but I don't need to keep smelling the fresh paint for hours and hours, right? So it's like when you paint a room, it smells, it smells like paint when you first open that can and put some paint on, but after 10 minutes, you can't smell it. You leave the room for 15 minutes and you come back in, it's like, oh, there's that paint again. So that's that process. So you have to just know that that's active, and you don't sniff too much, is all the lesson I'm saying. But so this sense of smell is wired for investigation. Like, what is it? Do I recognize this? It's like, And there's sort of 3 steps of awareness. One is, can you tell the difference between 2 glasses of beer? One has something different about it than the other, right? That's called threshold measurement. What's the smallest amount of a chemical that you can add to a beer that someone can tell the difference? They usually will do two samples versus 1 sample, and your job as a taster is to pick out the one that's different. Now, that's not identification. It's certainly not naming. It's certainly not even like recognizing anything. It's just, is it different? So that's the lowest level. That's a biological level. That's really determined by genetics. And no matter how much training you have, you're not going to improve that by more than a little, right? That's just fixed. And most of us have some variation in our sensitivities. You know, we're DNA, we're made of DNA, and DNA acquires errors. You know, so we may have multiple copies of receptors, and we might have a mix of really capable copies and copies that are not so capable. And so people tend to fall in different groups. There are some chemicals that people are known to be blind to. You know, diacetyl is pretty common. When you get in a tasting group, that maybe 1 out of 10 people are like, yeah, I don't smell the butter, you know, because it's just, they're just not wired for that. For most smells, it doesn't matter because we perceive things with multiple different, that we have many different kinds of receptors responding to, say, fruity smells like esters. So you can miss a few or have some insensitive ones or even extra sensitive ones. Overall, you know, we can talk about, we like the smell of an apple, right? Because we share enough, you know, even though we're a little bit different in our own thing. So this really is just about, and so there's threshold. Then the next step is recognition. That's like, I know what that is. I think I know what that is. I recognize it. I remember it. I can't name it. So that's the next step up. That's a cognitive task. You can get better at that. And the more experience you have, the more training on certain chemicals, you just learn what your internal term is for them. And then you go on to use the industry term. So the third level, purely cognitive task, is identification. That is actually pinning a name on it. And again, you know, you have to learn what your response is, and then there's an industry term for it. You know, there's a chemical in beer called acetaldehyde, and it's usually described as having kind of a green apple smell. Yeah. And I searched for green apple for years and years and years, and because I'm thinking of like candy, green apple candy. And I just was not getting that candy thing. But at some point, I just had a little thing in my head go, it's like the bottom of a lawnmower that's run over wet grass with rotting apples on it. And then for me, that was like, okay, that must be acetaldehyde, because it's kind of grassy, and aldehyde, and aldehydes are famously associated with grassy smells. Like grasshoppers can't hardly smell anything else besides aldehydes, because that's what they eat, right? And that's their food cue. So, and then, you know, it might smell like latex paint to you. It might smell like the inside of a pumpkin, a raw pumpkin. It might smell like a flower shop. It is actually what drunk breath smells like, because your body turns. It's the next thing between alcohol and not alcohol is acetaldehyde. You make one chemical change and you go from acetaldehyde to alcohol, and then in your body it reverses and it goes into acetaldehyde first, and then starts to get broken into other things. But then, you know, you just got to learn what your memory is from your life that makes sense of that smell. But then you got to connect that to the professional term. Right. You don't want to read a professional book and get all the words and then try and find the words. It doesn't work very well, like as happened with me with acetaldehyde. So,
Gotcha.
So now we actually have, it looks like we have 2 different, that each nostril is very slightly different. And the one nostril, over a period of a few hours, one nostril swells up and the other one shrinks down a little bit. And then like one gets wider and one gets narrower, and that changes the rate of airflow. And then after a few hours, it reverses. It's just this natural cycle where one, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But what that gives is like different flow rates through
Yep.
your nose, which means that certain chemicals are going to fall on different parts of where your receptors are. And that's going to give your brain almost like, it's not really stereo vision, but each half of your nose gives the brain a slightly different picture that gives it just a little
Okay.
more information that
Okay.
makes it more sensitive to differences.
Uh-huh.
And then we have a third nose that's this retronasal nose. And that happens, as you could see from these diagrams. That's when a volatilized liquid containing aromas comes back up your throat. Because you think
Right.
about it, you swallow it, you get it liquid into your mouth, you warm it up a lot, right?
Right.
And that warming releases a lot of vapors. And now you're swallowing it down your throat, the back of your mouth and your throat. This is a large surface area that allows those vapors to kind of warm up and come off of. And so when you breathe out through your nose with your lips closed, you get a different, your brain goes into a slightly different mode. Your brain knows which way the wind is blowing
Right.
back there. They know the air is coming out, and it switches into a slightly different organization that's more focused on pleasantness, familiarity. It can't be a danger detector because you've just swallowed it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the information? And so it's really about pleasantness and familiarity and recognition. And the other thing is that your mouth, it contains a lot of active enzymes. Your saliva contains enzymes, and the bacteria that live on your tongue also have their own enzymes. And there are flavor molecules called glycosides that are basically a sugar. Glyco means sugar, so it's a big, heavy sugar molecule with a little flavor molecule stuck onto it. And as long as that flavor molecule is stuck on there, it's too heavy to volatilize. So it just goes through and you don't smell it. But those enzymes are very common in your mouth. And so it'll pop those two things apart. And now you can actually smell something maybe like a floral smell that you wouldn't be able to smell citrusy, floral type, like terpenoids, perhaps, things like that you wouldn't be able to smell by themselves. So there's actually different chemistry there. So that's another reason you don't want to miss that. So it's really important, and you have to just focus on that and learn the technique for sort of quietly, gentle breathing out your nose. I find it's helpful to kind of cycle through of like inhale gently through your mouth, pause, close your lips, exhale out, and do that sort of back and forth over 2 or 3 second cycle. And do that a few times. And that seems to help like build that up and make it a little more evident to you, because you might miss it in just one pass. At least I do. That's sort of my technique. I've not seen that anywhere, but that's something I like to do.
Got you.
So that's the other. So, but see, now you got all these, however you get to them, you have this enormous pattern of responses, and the brain just looks at the pattern and calls whatever's there. It calls out all that pattern one thing, right? Like an orange or something. And so what that means is that you can't go back and pick the pieces out of that very well unless you really are trained on it. The greatest, and this is what they call a configural smell, right? So configural just means all the parts and pieces are stuck together. It's wrapped up in a black box and you can't see inside. But what you get is the totality of it, right? And the best example I can give of that is a cola, like a cola formula, right? Cola is lemon peel, lime juice, orange blossom, nutmeg, coriander, and cinnamon. None of those things by themselves smell like cola. But when you put them together, it just like all of a sudden your brain's like, yep, that's cola. And if you're a person that's involved in the soft drink industry, putting flavors together, like, oh, this one's got a lot of nutmeg and this one's a little short on the lime juice. They have knowledge and training that allows them to kind of see inside the box because they know they put them together themselves, right? So, and a lot of things work that way. It's believed that hops are composed mainly of terpenoids, which is a certain type of aroma of a floral to citrusy aroma compounds.
Yeah.
Mainly. And there's like close to 1,000 of them that are known, but not one of them actually smells like hops.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. If you've ever smelled geraniol or linalool or one of those compounds, linalool smells like coriander and lavender.
Yeah.
But it does, and maybe a little bit like orange, but it doesn't smell like hops. And geraniol smells like geraniums and roses. That doesn't smell like hops. So none of these things smell like hop. But you put a bunch of them together, and they create this configural smell. Esters in wine, same deal, right? There's there's hundreds of esters that they can look at and deconstruct a wine, and they can figure maybe there's like 20 that are important in a wine. They've done experiments that they figure out what chemicals are important to create a model wine, and then they can see what happens when they leave stuff out. And in one experiment, they were able to take out every single ester but one, and it still smelled the same fruitiness.
Okay.
Which is crazy, because you think how people talk about the fruitiness of wine and whatever, but it's like, it's not, it's just like kind of the same thing, whatever you do. But the thing was is that in order to make the fruitiness of equal intensity, not only did they replace the quantity, they had to replace they had to multiply the quantity of its aromatic potency by 6 times, because there was so much interaction, so much reinforcement between the different esters going on, that they had to put way more of this one ester in to get it up to the same intensity level. So it was really quite fascinating. So, and I think
going,
and I think malt, the chemicals in malt might work that way too. So this whole idea of configural stuff is really fascinating. And also from a producer point of view, you want to create those, right? If you're making a strawberry beer, our leading product in the marketplace at Forbidden Root is a strawberry beer, strawberry basil hefeweizen. So strawberry also is one of those things that's like cola. It takes about 6 or 7 things to make something smell like strawberry, but none of them smell anything like strawberry. There's a couple of berries. There's one that smells like a plastic cup. There's one that smells like kind of greasy, one that smells kind of like cotton candy that has this like really lightly caramelized sort of thing. It's just like sweet caramelly, very, very light caramel. One of them's kind of like a little bit like Parmesan cheese. It's like butyric acid or butyric acid, which is kind of like it's either puke or it's Parmesan. Okay. That's another experiment about verbal framing. They've done experiments where they'll say, "Here's some puke. Here's some puke. How do you?" And people are like, "Oh my God, that's horrible." Here's some Parmesan cheese. Same chemical.
Like,
it's exactly the same chemical. I love Parmesan cheese. It's like it's really about how the brain comes at it. That's why when you're making labels for beers or anything really, getting that language right is so important, because it's called verbal framing, and people it creates expectations that the beer will either live up to or fall short of, and you can use that to kind of guide people for how they need to think about this. And I love brewing. I think it's fascinating, but all the stuff that kind of surrounds it that helps you sell and help your customers understand what they should expect is really, really important. And you can screw that up really badly if you get it wrong, because you could turn people off really easily, So
true. Totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah. Did this just out of my curiosity, just a little bit about the sense of smell and taste, because it looks like it's a separate system, but somehow it's intertwined in how we perceive flavor. Let's say when we are sick, right? We lose a sense of smell mostly, and then suddenly we can't really taste how good the food is. It's like, Can you just share some thought about it?
Well, there's sort of 2 things there. One is that the senses are really integrated, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I think, because it's a whole thing, and I spent a whole chapter on it in the book. But one is just losing that sense of smell. And for some people who have some chemical injury or some infection or something that really wipes out their sense of smell, and they never get it back, it can lead to a lot of really bad outcomes psychologically. They can lead to a lot of social isolation. They tend to really overly worry about the smell of their own bodies because they can't smell, they can't tell, so they feel socially insecure. They have a lot more trouble finding, girlfriends and boyfriends. So it can be really extreme. But on the other hand, people who are born without a sense of smell do just fine.
Okay,
because they haven't learned to depend on it, and they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they're missing, I guess you'd say. But it's pretty fascinating. But with COVID and other those kinds of respiratory things, it's quite common for some smell loss, but that generally grows back. It damages those nerves that are right up in the kind of top of your nose, and it damages those nerve endings, and it takes a while for the nerve cells to grow, to be replaced. That's one of the few places in your in your whole neural system,
right,
that these cells are being constantly replaced, like every 2-3 weeks, because they're just like dangling out. These tiny little fingers are dangling out there in your mucus in the environment, and it's a really harsh environment for them to be in. So they just don't survive very long. And it's true of your taste buds and your tongue also. So those all get replaced. So eventually they grow back. But the problem is sometimes with smell, when they grow back, they get scrambled. So all of your different, all the receptors of a similar type that are sensitive to certain chemicals, they will grow like a telephone switchboard, and all those chemicals that are all the receptors of the same genetic type, they will go together and concentrate before they get sent up through the olfactory bulb. And what happens when they grow back after injury, sometimes they grow back a little bit scrambled. So it takes people a time to kind of almost retrain their recognition of familiar objects. And it's quite common for roasty smells, for some reason, like coffee, chocolate, dark beer. It's quite common for those to actually smell like feces to people. And that's obviously kind of terrible if your coffee literally smells like crap. But again, you can over time, you can learn to rewire your brain's interpretation of those and learn new patterns. But it takes some time, and there are techniques that they give to people to smell, say, an orange and like an orange and wintergreen and thyme and a donut or whatever it is. It's like 4 or 5 really different things, and just smell them regularly several times a day, and just make it part of make it like an exercise program for your nose. And then at some point switch those up and try different ones. You can do it with just household, house stuff you got laying around the house. It doesn't have to be special chemicals for that purpose, but that helps. That helps a lot with people with, there's people with certain types of dementia, especially Parkinson's. They believe loss of aroma is like an early sign of Parkinson's for people, but they can, they can use that as a way to kind of help maintain functionality and things like that. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And to kind of recalibrating your sense of smell is also another interesting topic too, like what you mentioned. Smell different easy household things that you can find, and just try to get the scent of smells back to the old track that it was built.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing for anybody in tasting. With brewing schools and Cicerone and BJCP judging, homebrew judging, even people will get together in groups and get the chemical spikes and put the spikes in the beer and learn maybe a dozen or two different of these chemicals that are common in beer, mostly off flavors. But just making simple flavor standards out of grocery store items and common household things for fruitiness, for spiciness, for herbal qualities. Like your kitchen has enough to do 20 or 30 different kind of flavored things, just like what you got laying around. Open a jar of jelly,
Right.
smell that. Like stick your finger on an orange and smell that versus a
Mm-hmm.
tangerine versus a blood orange versus a Meyer lemon. They're all a little
Right.
different. And so just to like train yourself to be specific about your vocabulary and learn, like really just, again, so much of it is really about interest and focus, and
Right.
if you don't have those two things, you'll never be much of a taster because, it really does. We ignore these senses a lot,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we've always, like scientists have always thought, well, we're just not very good. But it's like, no, we're really good, but you got to put some effort into it,
Yeah. And that is probably like, I think you've already answered my next question, which is the difference between drinking and tasting. Drinking is like act of consuming liquid, but tasting is like what you said. You dissect every bit and piece of it and try to extract the information as much as you can. And then analyze it, right?
Yeah, and it depends on what you're trying to do. It's
Mm-hmm.
different if you're judging a beer competition than if you're working on a quality control panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the quality control panel is like, should we sell this beer or not sell this beer?
Right.
That's the question, right? Do we say go or no go
Mm-hmm.
on that beer? But with a
Mm-hmm.
with a competition, most
Mm-hmm.
of those are done relative to styles. You have a set of style guidelines. Doesn't matter how
Right.
you feel about the guideline as a judge. Your job is to
Mm-hmm.
interpret it without making up your own one, and
Right.
like just doing your best job and saying, does this fit this style or not fit this style? And then beyond
Right.
that, are there qualities this beer has that are pleasant that makes it even more fabulous?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it really depends on like and if you're tasting as you're doing an evaluation of beers that are maybe competitive to something you're contemplating
Right.
on brewing,
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit different mindset. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
like everything, it's very task specific, and you need to kind of adjust but the technique's always the same.
Yeah.
It's just the mental focus is different.
Gotcha. So I think we are at the tail end of the session. There are two more subtopics that we will explore. So the first one is about ways to, because now we know how our body functions, in a nutshell, and what are those senses that involve in perceiving the beer savoriness. I think it is the best time to talk about how to maximize our drinking perception, the method, the vehicle of taking us there. So Randy, can we just zoom in the tasting and just walk us through the recommended practice and process, to taste the beer?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing you do, you got my little chart there. First thing is pour the beer, set it on the table, this far away from you. And can you smell anything? Sometimes you can, right? Sometimes a really hoppy, one of those New England hazy IPAs, that hop aroma should be coming out of that glass for you. Maybe especially like the tropical notes, that bit of grapefruit or passion fruit. Those are very intense molecules. They contain sulfur, to which we're really sensitive to. And so can you smell anything? And then, then the next thing you do is what they call a drive-by. So you put the glass in, you sort of generally just move it around, keep the liquid moving just a little bit to drive off some aroma, and walk it slowly by your nose. Can you smell anything now? Maybe again, some more of those sulfur compounds like DMS, that's that sort of creamed corn, cooked corn kind of flavor, generally regarded as a flaw in beer. Maybe some other very light, very potent molecules that you're going to smell just a little bit. And if you go back in again and sniff hard for them, you've already habituated. So that's why you start. Then give it a swirl, give it a little sniff, just a half a second, something like that. Don't try to run that sniff yourself. Just let your brain do it, because the brain knows what it wants to do. It actually meters the volume of air and the velocity coming in. It's quite a complicated thing. The brain, we are unbelievable. We are unbelievably sophisticated and complicated creatures, which has just been a thrill to find out about. And then, so then, you know, give it a sniff. What can you like? Can you identify it? Do you recognize it? And then if you can identify it, that's great. And then go back and see, are there layers? Is there something else you can pick out? Is there something else? So go back 2 or 3 times. Beyond that, probably not going to get much information out. And then get it in your mouth, small sip, move it around your mouth. In wine, they do this thing called chewing the wine.
Okay. Yeah.
You've probably seen the sommeliers doing that, right?
Right.
And the purpose is it's like kind of a showy way of doing what really makes sense. You want to get that liquid all over your mouth. You want to coat all the surfaces. Don't be in a rush to swallow, because now your gums and your tongues and cheeks, they're all body temperature. They're nice and warm. So they're going to volatilize a lot of stuff off. So that and then like, what do you get then when it's in the mouth? Pay attention to try and separate the sweet, sour, salty, bitter aspects of it. Then pay attention to the mouthfeel aspects of it. Creaminess, astringency being kind of the 2 big ones that you're going to find in beer, maybe. And then pay attention and watch the bitterness build, because bitterness is a very waxy material. It takes it a long time to get itself situated on your taste buds. You are a little more sensitive to it on the back of the tongue. And because it's waxy, it tends to get on these cells and stay there. So, you know, you might have had an experience where you have your last IPA at a bar and go home, and like 20 minutes later, it's like, I could still taste that bitterness, right? Because the cracks and crevices, and it's like wax. And so pay attention to the long tail, the long finish of a beer. And then, you know, once that stuff's in your mouth, and once you've swallowed it, gently expel it out through your nose and look for that retronasal, because that'll be perceived not as aroma so much, but as flavor. So all the different parts of the brain are all coming together and giving you that flavor, and hopefully giving you a little bit more information. And that's really basically the technique.
Got you. And does the level of beer in the glass matter? Like, do you have to leave enough room for the headspace, or are there any certain numbers that can be recommended?
Yeah, absolutely. That glass you show, that's a good glass. And generally, you want a glass that's wider at the fill line than it is at the top. And that's like the one scientific thing that I found, that they know for sure that a wider center and a taller top give you more aroma. Now, beer is not like wine because it's carbonated, right? Yeah. So we can judge it in plastic cups, and it works just fine. Whereas wine, it's a lot more difficult, because without the carbonation, they have half as much aroma coming out as beer does, right? So we're lucky with that, because the carbonation just keeps bringing that aroma to the surface again and again. But the picture's about right, about a third full. You honestly, for a tasting, you know, an ounce, maybe like 2 ounces of beer per person for like for judging or some serious tasting. It's not for a recreational tasting, like, you know, where you have to go to a restaurant where you want to give people maybe 4 or 5 ounces per pour. But for a serious thing, you know, you have 90% of your information before you put that liquid in the mouth, because so much of it is going to be about what you smell. And the flaws are going to show up as you know, in the smell, rather than and the palate. What it happens in the mouth usually is just like, yeah, that's papery, stale, E2 So,
right. And I think, I mean, if you have if you ever been to a tasting session, or you've been tasting a lot of beers, certainly that our body can experience fatigue, right? On the palate, on the nose. Are there any practice that they can do to help recover them from that situation?
Well, it's really just you take breaks. You can drink water. You can get up and go to the bathroom and just like get up. They sometimes will put coffee beans on the table that you can sniff some roasted coffee beans, and that will reset your palate. You can actually if you habituate to the smells and you're just not getting much out of the smell, you can just
Right.
smell anything different. You can smell the back of your hand. What's this cat doing? Stop that. He wants my attention and he's not getting it.
Yeah.
So, anything you could do to kind of have a little break. If you've got really intense beers, there's like if you're doing experimental beers and herb beers and smoked beers and things, they usually put crackers or bread on the table and you can eat a little of those. I don't find those useful for just beer to beer to beer, but if you've got really strong taste, those will help kind of scrub that out of your mouth. So, it's a lot of it's just common sense. And,
it's just like small details that could possibly help, but you have to taste cautiously too. Yeah.
Everything matters. But again, if you got a lot of focus, if you know what to expect, if you know your style guidelines, if you've done this before a few times, it gets easier. You get faster at it. First thing you notice when you judge with professionals is how fast they go compared to homebrew judges. Homebrew judges will take 15 minutes on a beer, whereas there's like the commercial guys are like 3-4 minutes. Like you got to get it, and that includes writing stuff out. You got to get through it. But it gets, the more you do, the easier it gets. So just trust yourself that you can get better at this. And it really just and the one thing the studies show that even a little training makes a huge difference. So just get out there. If you have a chance to judge homebrew, that's really like, you want to be a beer expert, get out and judge some homebrew, because two things. One, it's just experience. There's people at that table that probably know more than you do. So that's really helpful. But also when you're judging with a group of people, different groups of people, and you're the person at the table not getting diacetyl every time, it sort of results in kind of an ad hoc kind of calibration. Like you just realize what you're super sensitive to and what you're not very sensitive to compared to the group. And that takes a little time, but it's really useful. And because there's no real easy way to do that outside of a laboratory setting.
True. Definitely. All right. I think, up to this point, some of us, including me, really want to, rush to the fridge, open it, grab some, beers, can of bottles and crack open, pour and try to taste it. But there's one thing that is missing here, and it is the last question. So, because, if we can taste it, but we do not know how to communicate or convey the message of what we perceive or the attributes of, what we taste, then it would be difficult and we are not reaching the goal line yet. So, Randy, we need your help to get us there. Briefly, how can one properly, build up the vocab for beer tasting?
Well, part of it is just learning the flavors, the important flavors one by one. Part of it is also just getting comfortable writing about something that we don't write about very much. One of there's a woman named Lauren at New Belgium who's in charge of their barrel program.
Okay.
Fabulous. Amazing person. And she says, when I have new people in my program, one of the first things I do is I give them a beer or actually say, you pick a beer, any beer you want. And I want you to write me, I want you to do 3 beers and I want you to write me 3 descriptions. And I want you to write them as extravagant as you can in almost like a style of a romance novel. Really dig into it and really go over the top and really just describe the hell out of this beer. And she says it really works because it lowers people's inhibitions, because people, again, I don't know how to do this. And I'm not very confident. I can't smell very well. There's all this insecurity around it. You got to get over that and just know that, you're not as good as you want to be, but you'll get better. And don't be fearful about it. And don't be timid. Just jump right out there and do it, and say it. And if a thought pops into your head, put it down. You can reorganize it later, So I think that's half the battle, I think, for people who are just starting out, because it seems really intimidating. And I know it can be. It was for me originally. But it's not all that hard. And you can, it just like put the effort into it, you're going to get the rewards. And all of a sudden you look around and find yourself like, wow, I can actually taste some things. And what you learn in beer, you could put that to work in wine or whiskey or anything else, because the techniques are mostly the same. It's
Mhm.
just like the chemistry is a little different. So, and
Right.
the like the specifications of what you're really looking for are different. And wine is organized by this um, what they call prototypes, which are really about grape varietal first, a region second, and then the terroir things like soil and which side of the
Mhm.
river and which side of the hill
Climate. Yeah.
and weather and like wet year, dry year, hot year, cold year, all that stuff. But that's like that, and that takes a very long time for those sommeliers. It takes years, decade even, to get to that point where
Mhm.
you can pass a master exam, because they
Right.
do those as blind exams and they got to pull all that information out of the wine. It's a little weird, but it's pretty impressive. So,
Right.
but at any rate, yeah, you're better than you think. Just know that. If you take nothing else from this talk, like, know that.
There's no way. There's no way that that's gonna happen. Yeah, but from your advice, just it's and you've mentioned this, too through the session. Is like you have to put yourself out there, do a lot of tasting, dive and study, and just start building up your vocab, and then you'll definitely learn a lot of things, and you'll be good at it.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
All right, that's great, Randy. I mean, we are way off an hour mark, and I'm sorry for that.
No, that's okay. Well, we had a little technical trouble in the beginning, but we got it
Yeah,
sorted out. So I'm happy to
yeah,
talk to you.
sure.
It's great to. I mean, I don't know anything about the beer scene in Thailand. I mean, the fact that we've
Uh-huh.
got a guy like you doing podcasts and stuff. I mean, it's the same all over the world. I was just in Poland, and they've got a really nice scene there going. They're still a
Mhm.
very small part of the market,
Yeah.
but there's a huge amount of enthusiasm, and it's really great to see how people all over the world are not really trying to copy American craft beers, but are
Mhm.
trying to copy the movement in their
Yeah.
own way, in their own terms, with their
Mhm.
own culture and cuisine. And that's just like beyond thrilling, to see. So it's really fabulous. So I
It's
appreciate.
really great to hear that. Yeah, and you're very welcome to the platform, and thanks for joining us. I think it's probably time to let you go, even though I really hate to do it because I really had fun talking to you. But before that, the last question for real is like, do you have any final thoughts for this topic?
No, again, I think I just said it all.
Right.
It's really about understanding yourself to a certain
Hmm.
point, and
Hmm.
trying to get yourself in the right mind frame. And don't be afraid to go to wine tastings and other things. Anything like a sake tasting, or like any tasting, you're going to
Yeah.
learn something from. You're going to learn some chemistry. You're going to learn some technique, and it all feeds into the same. It's all part of the same thing. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid
Yeah.
to branch out and learn about it. Don't just feel like you need to just stick to beer, because what you learn at one is going to transfer to another pretty easily, I think. So
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's not gonna hurt you, right? You have more colors to paint in your, paint box. That's always good.
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's great, and that's a great sum up. And I think it's where we will end the session. So, Randy, I mean, thank you so much again for joining us today and guiding us
Sure.
through all this beer tasting topic.
Yeah,
I
my
truly
pleasure.
appreciate it. Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay. I hope to be able to catch up with you sometime in person in near
Yeah, that'd be
future, but
great.
we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right
All right.
then. Take care. Have a good
Okay.
day, and
Bye
thank you
now.
so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Yeah. All right, guys. Here you have it. The way to maximize your drinking perception via tasting, and this is the end of the session. I hope at least at the end of session here, if you listen throughout all of this hour and a half probably session, you will be able to tell the difference between drinking and tasting. And if you can pick up a little bit more details about how your body works, and you apply it into your daily life, and it helps you elevate or enhance the experience of your consumption in food and beverage, that's going to do a lot to me. So that's it for today. The Good Burp session will be back in no time, so stay tuned. Until next time, cheers and sawasdee krap.